Kitty Demure actually just recently appeared on Timcast where she was debating a politician drag queen about a lot of the hot topics that come out of the LGBT community. Let's react to that. So, for those that don't know, Kitty Demure is a drag queen who opposes the sexualization of children in all of the same attributes that I do. And so she recently appeared on Timcast, where he has, I believe, over 1 million followers on his channel. And so I want to be able to react to some of the things that was said from her opponent or from our opposition. And so forgive me, you guys, I actually want to show it. I'm controlling both of these cameras. Like, look, camera over there, camera over here. Camera over there, camera over here. So I did this because I edit these videos, manually. So I'm hopeful that now I can just zigzag between all of these different camera angles just by the click of a button. But it's so cool. Hopefully it works. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this. So I want to touch base about a personal story of her past. And her name is maybe a girl, or I'll get her name. I'll display it here. I forgot what her name is, but let's react to some of this.
I think a lot of this tolerance that they're trying to thrust on the public starts at the home. And it's these kids come from tolerant homes. And so
but what about the kids that don't come from tolerant homes?
Well, I don't think those are the kids that are being read to.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but that's the thing. There are queer children being raised in homes that are intolerant. Mm-hmm. I myself grew up in a home where my parents became much more tolerant when they realized that I was a queer person. And there was a lot of hesitation and objection at first. And that was based off of what they had learned growing up. And so we're perpetuating this culture of gay is weird, LGBTQIA is, oh, that's other. You don't know. Don't engage in that. That's adult content. There's something wrong with that. I wish I had grown up in a school environment where I had adults and other people around me saying, it's okay to be who you are.
So I just want to respond to this because the reason why you want to grow up in a way where there's a school that's very accepting is because our generation grew up in a time where these types of things just were not accepted. So it's normal for you to want to perpetuate that now, but I think it's important to realize that the culture in which students and children are growing up now is nowhere near like it was for, people like ourselves. And I think that that's a good thing because it really shows the level of progress that we've made, and it's important to recognize that. When we were growing up, there was no necessarily teachings of how to be heterosexual. There was reproduction, which I would argue that it doesn't teach you how to be straight, it teaches you how to make a baby. But when you start getting into this journey of, let's teach, students what heterosexual is, what homosexual is, what all of these different facets are, it leads them down a journey that, in my mind, and in a lot of parents' concerns, is now you're instilling with them sexual orientations outside of what people deem appropriate, because now you're talking about sexual attraction and how that makes all of us different within that. But now let's add in gender that we're going to change and confuse students even further. So if you're going to perpetuate a culture in which that's accepting of all people, that's one thing. But if you're going to sit here and say that we need to specifically teach about, lesbian, gays, transgenderism, I would ask why, because necessarily I talk to the gay community a lot, and it seems like it would just be a lot easier to teach people just to be nice, and that kind of would be a blanket solution to all of our troubles. And the reason I brought this up is because we need to ensure that we're not using our history to develop laws and policy today. We want to make sure that we are using the data and facts that are actually happening today to be able to benefit society. Using our personal experience or anecdotal is great in some instances, but today, children are a lot safer when it surrounds this topic at home, and if it's not, then the school should be that crutch to be able to help that student transition there with their parents and give them the education that they need. But teaching this to everyone as a blanket teaching, in my opinion, is very inappropriate, and you're starting to see children be a lot more sexualized in these curiosities. So I think it's best that because we have this hypersexualized culture, that we do everything possible to ensure that the next generation coming up is not as sexual. So we all talk about banning books. Everyone thinks it's a bad thing. And there's a book out there, Genderqueer, that teaches kids how to use Grindr. And while this is an LGBT platform, it's nowhere near appropriate for children. And what you'll see here is that she actually defends these types of things and doesn't even condemn it. So let's react to that.
Well, so would you agree with the Florida legislature and Ron DeSantis in removing these books from the curriculum?
You know, here's the thing. Are these books in the curriculum?
In the schools, I believe.
Because there's a big difference between these books being in the curriculum versus
Yeah.
being available for somebody to rent out at the library if they want. What is
should
wrong
these be in
about
grade school libraries?
but let me ask this. I don't know the conditions of every school in Florida. Because a lot of schools have multiple grade levels. If there is a school that is, elementary through high school, then yeah, I'm sure that there are some teenagers who might want to read this content, might want to learn about that. Am I endorsing it or condoning it? No. But do I think it should be banned? No. I think that's dangerous when we start to censor. And it's so interesting to me because...
So I want to talk about you bringing up the censored in this topic while we're going through this. When you talk about a book like this that goes over, sexual orientation in such explicit ways with imagery and how-tos, basically, and then you also, intertwine that with Grindr, it really concerns me that you don't really see the big difference between not only how Grindr is inappropriate for children, considering what that platform is, but the fact that you're not openly willing to condemn it. See, we don't want to condemn these books because we think it's bad to ban them, but we have to agree that underage people do not need to learn about Grindr. Grindr is an adult platform for adults. So when you start introducing this to children, it really brings up the concern as to why you would want to do something like that. And that's where we start getting the grooming label put on the LGBT community, because the children don't need to have access nor curiosity about Grindr. And you go on to talk about in this segment here, excuse me, guys, I should not drink Sprite when I do these podcasts because it definitely makes it harder with the bubblies. But you go on in here and you bring up how Grindr can be a tool for people to, meet other queer people, when you know for a fact that is not the case. Grindr is a sexual app that is used for sexual reasons, and it's hardly any friends are made on that, and you know that that's not the culture, and that is a blanket statement I'm willing to fight for and say about the LGBT community, hence why I have my content the way that I do. You know that we have a hypersexualized culture, you know what Grindr is used for, and yet you refuse to openly condemn this book being, for children, simply because the book is LGBT. This is where the gay privilege starts coming in. This book is inherently wrong for children, and you know that, and you're not condemning it. Hence why we are in the predicament that we're in, with all of these laws combating our culture, because we aren't willing to bring in the reins and say, this is what's wrong, this is not okay, kids shouldn't have access to this. We have people like yourself that are actually in office that are perpetuating these behaviors as if they're okay, and they're not.
The right frequently is going off about First Amendment and free speech, and then they go and they try to censor any sort of LGBTQIA content because the child might perhaps see it. The thing is, I don't believe in my heart of hearts that this is being endorsed on a large scale to young children. There might be a few bad actors, but I don't think that they speak for the LGBTQIA community in the same way that I don't think that any given pedophile who is cis heterosexual speaks for the whole cis het community.
So this is quite literally the perspective of the right on grooming. That you would argue in any way children should be able to access this is grooming.
But having a book in a library, is that actually grooming? Is there a librarian there or, teachers and adults saying, hey, check out this book and read it and look at all of the imagery? And if there is, I will tell you right here that those are outliers. Those are
When-
outliers.
You know, when you want to talk about outliers in our community, how do we correct these outliers? Like, how do we target this, audience that is perpetuating negativity for our community if we're not going to openly say, like on a platform like this, that this is absolutely wrong? You really beat around the bush around this topic instead of answering it straight ahead and steam forward with it. That's where my concern is really coming from. In one hand, you're talking about, I don't condone this. I don't think it's okay. I don't like this behavior. But then in one other hand, you're not really going after it directly and saying, nope, this is wrong and we shouldn't do it. And I have no problem doing it. This book is wrong, should be banned out of schools, and shouldn't have children being able to access it at all.
And that's the big argument. That's the big thing that the right uses to go against queer people is you take these outlier situations and try to apply it to the whole LGBTQIA
But there's
community, which is not true.
very few people speaking out against it.
The same happens on the right as well. They're also not a monolith. And I have been that drag queen that has been there for the right and the conservatives. And you wouldn't believe the emails that I get from conservative parents, Republican parents who have gay children. And they don't know how to deal with it because the LGBTQ community abandoned them. They have demonized all of the right. They've abandoned. They have.
I think it's the reverse.
Even your own.
But Loudoun County is not even the right? So Loudoun County is literally 10 seconds from here. And this is where parents came out and said, why was this book given to my kids? The response? Condemnation by the LGBT
Show
community?
me were these books subscribed to children? Were they given to children? If it's something that's in a library,
You keep pulling a bunch of different stories.
but again,
story after
I
story.
see you keep pulling these things up. But again,
am I supposed to do?
this is not representative of what is happening everywhere. It's very easy to pick and choose these specific instances where that happens. And yes, I agree with you.
Will
That
you-
I don't think that this sort of content should be given to exclusively elementary school children.
Should this teacher be criminally charged for providing instructions on Grindr to minors?
I don't know if they should be criminally charged, but I think that person might understand how.
Why wouldn't you want someone criminally charged for giving access to adult content to children? Like, think about this. You are literally saying it is okay for an adult to give a child adult content and that not be criminalized. Why? Like, why is it so hard to say yes to that? Like, you have someone that's 15 or 16 and an adult coming in saying, hey, this is what Grindr is. Or even giving them material to say, this is how you can find out what Grindr is. Like, why is it so hard for you to say, you know what? This is bad and it shouldn't be for kids. But this statement that you're about to say is actually very telling. So here we go.
But I think that person might understand how difficult it is for queer people to meet other queer people in the context of an environment where they are ostracized and told that there's something wrong with them.
These are middle schoolers being given sexually explicit books that discuss scat, scissor sisters, and how to use Grindr.
But again, okay, is this widespread? This particular article that you brought up, is this happening in every school district, in every county, in every state? No, it's very easy.
I don't think
to pick
whether
and
it's happening
choose and
everywhere is
pull
an
up-
argument for whether this is illegal.
But that's what I'm saying. It's very easy to pick and pull out this particular.
You can do that on any
instance.
topic. I
Right,
mean, you
and-
do
and
with
so-
racism
but-
too.
but-
You know, it's really concerning because in my view, it doesn't really necessarily matter how many times it's happening. It's just a fact that it's happened even once. As policymakers, even hopefully myself one day, we actually have to make policy and laws based on what is actually happening. And we can argue a majority of people aren't out there, committing murder, but we have laws against murder. So, like, the logic that you're using, that it needs to happen on a grand scale in order for us to put policy, in order for us to ban it, is really telling because you want to be able to sway away from that to protect the children. What we see as policymakers is what is actually happening. And whether it's one district, 2 or 3, should kind of give you an idea that, okay, you know what, this school district did it and so did this one. Let's go ahead and put a policy in place so ours doesn't do that. And that's really how you make policy, is you see trends that are happening within your field. In this case, it would be like a school board decision and say, you know what, all of these surrounding school boards, or maybe the one down the way is actually implementing this book in their libraries. We in our community don't want that here, so let's go ahead and put a policy in place to prevent that. It doesn't necessarily matter how many times it's happening, it's just the fact that it is happening. But this book is actually distributed widespread across hundreds of districts, and this is why they actually bring it up. So it's really concerning, that my community doesn't find value in condemning our own community, because that's how we get better. That's how we grow stronger. So this is where you talk about, kids being scared of their parents. And I want to go ahead and react to it because I want to be able to give you guys my thoughts about kids being scared to their parents.
Do you think that schools should be concealing the gender and names?
I do, and I'll tell you exactly
of
why.
of the kids, so they're
I
double.
do.
They're
Here's
living
the
double
thing.
lives.
I think
wanna know.
they're not living double lives.
Okay.
The kids are actually they feel safe enough to tell the people who are in their school environments who they are because they don't feel safe at home. If a child felt safe enough to come out to their parents, they would. The reason that a child would come out to teachers or peers or a counselor at school and not to their parents is very likely because they're afraid of the consequences of actually revealing that to their parents.
So when you talk about kids feeling safe at home, it's really concerning because any good parent in this planet knows that their children hate them at some point, knows that their parents, become an enemy at some point, because that's traditionally inherently within us. When you think about raising a child, a parent is going to be punishing their child in ways that a teacher could never. So when you think about it, a teacher takes away the cell phone for a day, they get it back at the end of the day. They go home and they need to get their cell phone taken away. It might be taken away for 2-3 days. They might be grounded. The parents are really instilling in a child the things that they need in order to be a successful person to this society. So why I bring this up is because there's going to be teachings that a child isn't going to like, such as chores, homework, perseverance, those types of things. You see it all the time with parents raising. I don't even have kids, and I see this. Is you see parents being good parents by sometimes giving a little bit of tough love. I could bring out a list of some of the things that was tough love with me and how that benefited me. As a matter of fact, when you think about it, children are less punished at school. So I would argue that the reason children traditionally feel safer at school to talk about these things is because they know that the punishment isn't there. And the reason punishment is there is because they mold children at home to be good members of society, putting in, parameters of decision making, putting boundaries, putting limits, and making sure that the child understands that no, you can't do this, but yes, you can do this. No, you're not able to express your way like this. You need to express it this way. Parents aren't there to be the number one winner in a child's life all the time. They need to make sure that they're raising a successful member of society. And children don't really have the mental capacity to be able to discern that. And that's why you're starting to get a lot of concern from parents, because the data's there. The data doesn't show that parents are being, harmful to their children. As a matter of fact, it would show that having parents incorporated in these decisions that children make actually show a higher quality person. And what this means is an LGBT person that has acceptance from the family and support from mom and dad, they actually have less suicidality rates, less drug addiction, less, wanting to unalive themselves. To have mental health issues, because their parents are involved. So when you talk about, not wanting to convey this to, a child's parent, you are opening up the door for a more toxic environment for them for the years leading in their life, simply because we're not willing to go down the journey of finding out why a child might feel unsafe disclosing this to their parents. And the majority of the time has nothing to do with being kicked out. A lot of people, at least, when you think about it, coming out of the closet is more of an acceptance. So you know it. So you accept that you're gay. You accept that you're a lesbian. Really telling your parents, a majority of them already know. Good parents know their children. And also when you talk about kids, becoming homeless, those types of things, that's with the foster care system. It's not even with parents and their own kids. So I really would love to hear the logic from you, besides fear mongering as to why it would be healthy for a child to not tell their parents who they are or what they're thinking about, because that should be the safest place for them. And when you rip that away, you perpetuate, a toxic environment at home that doesn't really exist. When we talk about heterosexual culture, people always like to bring up the argument like, well, we're not banning anything from heterosexuals. This is something that you go over here that I want to provide some feedback on.
But that's actually the grooming argument, that certainly many of the drag queen story hours are just someone in drag reading stories. But as you mentioned, some people are crossing the line. And then you have the more egregious examples.
And when I say some, okay, there has to be millions, at least thousands to hundreds of thousands of drag performers. And many of them are doing Drag Queen Story Hour. You cannot outlaw the entire idea of it because one person has done that. Because on the flip side, when we think about cis heteronormative culture, there are dozens more examples of people who are grooming children, who are actual pedophiles. But are we saying we need to outlaw cis heteronormative culture? No.
Actually, we are. So there are things that children aren't able to do in heterosexual culture, and some of those could be, like burlesque, strip shows. We have ratings on a lot of our on our movies that children cannot see. So in society, it is traditionally, acceptable to be able to restrict things for children to view. It would actually be abnormal for us to look at a community and say, you know what, it's okay 100% of the sense to be able to allow a child to view everything from your culture. Our society has always put limits, especially with children, because at least for the majority of the United States, children should be sheltered from a lot of these things. And I would argue that drag is one of those things. So forgive me, you guys, I really want to play this 2-minute video and react to it in its entirety because it's a very good showing of the mental health of my community. And the reason I bring this up is because when you talk about, LGBT just wanting to be accepted in this world, you really have to understand why it is that we need this much acceptance. And I'll go over that after they respond. Or when I respond.
Queer people just want to be seen and recognized in the way that they see themselves.
But that's impossible.
I don't think it's impossible. I mean,
especially when it's fluid. I have a friend. She wanted me to talk about this. Her name is Megan. She works for the LA School District. She's a counselor, and they are walking on eggshells every day because they have children who are gender fluid, who go back and forth.
Can I ask why you put air quotes around that, as if gender fluid people don't exist? Even though it's not your experience.
Because I just personally don't believe in it.
Okay, so because it's not your experience and you don't believe in it, other people may not be like that.
Well,
that's really not a strong argument at all.
To ask a question then, how can you perceive someone the way they want to be seen if every day they're...
Exactly. Well, that's the point.
That's the thing is, that's why people are saying, these are my pronouns. And then you have folks who are saying, I don't do pronouns.
It's so unnecessary.
And that's the thing is, no, but that's the gag is everybody uses pronouns. People are just saying, these are the pronouns that I use. Just call me she instead of he. Call me they instead of she. And is it really that difficult to respect people and acknowledge people the way that they see themselves? And what is the actual inherent harm in that?
It's also not
nothing.
It's also not difficult to just let it roll off your back. I mean,
it's actually, I will tell you why it is difficult to let it roll off my back. When there are over 500 anti-LGBTQIA bills moving across the United States on the state level, on the federal level, I cannot let that roll off my back because there are people who would wish to see my existence eliminated. And the same with my community. And it started off in, we just don't want trans people in sports. And now it's moved to, we're banning gender-affirming healthcare across the board. Florida wants to take kids away.
They always leave out children.
Okay, well, you want to move into that? We can talk about that.
But they always argue that. You'll see them go on and on and on and on. I'm like, but they're not talking.
Do you really think? Did you not know that you were a queer person when you were a teenager?
No, I'm not. No, because I'm not queer because that's a slur.
Oh,
but you won't respect that.
Okay, all right. Well, if you don't want to be referred to as queer, I won't. But I have reclaimed the use of the word queer.
And you can do that.
Well, just as you said, faggot.
Yeah.
So it's really, I love the the battle between them two. Drag queens getting catty. I am gay. It is the culture, and I love seeing it.
I got it from you. I got it from you. I am annoying. I am fake. I'm not who I'm being. I'm pretending to be somebody I'm not.
No, that's what I did not want to make it, Ganja.
Well, how am I supposed to feel in this moment?
Ganja, I didn't want to make it that everybody was attacking you.
I feel very attacked.
Relax.
It's really important to understand the question that they ask in which you avoid it. So how does one affirm someone's gender if it constantly changes every single day? When you have this social construct that you're trying to implement, you have to be able to display it in a rational way that makes sense to those so they can accept it. But if you're going to have it in a way where it is confusing, like Billy was trying to express to you, Megan, who is an counselor in LA Unified School District, they walk around eggshells around certain students because their gender is fluid so much that they're not able to affirm without that child saying something. And if you really think about it, is that going to be positive or negative on that child's mental health? When you see a child that's that confused, that can't make a decision, I would argue that it's absolutely wrong to affirm these things because you're basically instilling them that they need to be confused and have this fluidity about themselves. But even in a lot of psychological studies, in order for people to be ultimately happy with themselves, you have to know who you are. So parents, adults around a child should always help guide children in the right direction. And that would be the right way to view this, in society, but it is very different in reality. But someone that has the utmost well-being for a child sees a child confused, I would argue inherently wants to help that child. And so right now you're seeing children are confused, they're questioning things, and the structure has been thrown out the window, which is leaving them lost, confused, and unable to be happy with themselves. You see this in our suicidality rates. And when you talk about what's the inherent wrong with, affirming a child's gender? I bring this up a lot. 100 years ago, we weren't doing this, and the suicidality rate is nowhere near as high as it is now. And if affirming children lowers the suicidality rate, then that means when we weren't affirming, we should have had a much, much higher suicidality rate, and we didn't. It's actually steadily getting higher, and I would argue it's because of things like this, where we're not providing children structure, goals, things that are obtainable, things that make sense to provide structure in their life and in their mind to be able to process this thing called life. So when you say that we just want to be seen and we just want to be heard, no, that's not it. We just want to be able to walk this world as a life without fear of judgment or repercussions for the decisions that we make of our partner. And we didn't fight to be able to implement this in schools. We fought so we can go down at the local Denny's or the local diner with our partner and have some food and not have fear of recourse of reprimations. Sorry, I can't find the word. We shouldn't be in fear of being targeted simply because we're a same-sex couple. So for me, it's really concerning that you think, allowing children to have this fluidity would help them, and it doesn't. And the reason I bring this up is because even in this segment here, you're asked a direct question of what is hydrogender, and I want to show how you immediately deflect to something that you understand, because even the concept of hydrogender is something that you're not able to decipher and distinguish and to be able to explain to the person that's asking, but yet these are things that you're advocating for.
What about neogenders? I mean, if it's a spectrum between masculine and feminine, how would you describe something like hydrogender?
If somebody has an experience that I'm not familiar with, but this is how they see themselves, what is the problem in calling them the pronoun that they want to be called?
How would someone who is hydrogender affirm their gender?
What is hydrogender?
A
neogender.
A non-binary.
So for me,
one example I'm using.
So for instance, I'm trans non-binary, and people often think that non-binary people are different from trans people. The thing is that, again, with everything, things exist on a spectrum. So the spectrum of cis to trans is, there's a lot of, again, nuance in between there. So people can be either trans-binary or trans-non-binary. So somebody who, may have been born male and totally transitions to female and wants to be recognized entirely as female and feels that way and presents themselves that way, that's trans-binary. Somebody who's trans non-binary, for me, myself, I feel somewhere a little bit in between. If I'm getting, real and frank, I feel somewhere between like the middle, but moving closer to the feminine. So that's why for me, I feel comfortable using gender neutral pronouns, they, them. I don't like being referred to as he, him, because that doesn't encompass who I am. Yeah, I may have particular body parts. I may have been born in a particular body, but that's not how I move through the world. That's not how I see myself, and that's not how I want others to see myself. And I don't see what the big issue is in acknowledging people as they come to you. And that's liberty, that's freedom.
Yeah, that's not liberty. That's not freedom. What liberty and freedom is someone coming up to you and saying, this is what I want to be referred to, and you having the choice of saying no. So you're getting that mixed up. It's actually the LGBT community that wants to strip that liberty and freedom away and implement, a mandatory, you have to do these types of things, hence people losing their jobs, those types of things. And you're even seeing here in California where if a parent is, not going to affirm a child's gender, how it's going to be looked at negatively in the courts when there's custody battles. So that's what's wrong with this journey is, no, it's not liberty and freedom. And to mention, you actually went through a non-binary binary.
So people can be either trans-binary or trans-non-binary.
Saying that there's two different types of non-binary, either you're this or that. You're literally destroying the argument of non-binary being a thing by putting it in a binary. Does that make sense? Because it's kind of hard to explain, because it doesn't make sense. So, it's very concerning because you're not explaining what the hydrogender is. You're putting a non-binary in a binary, and you're expecting a child, 8 years old, to understand this? I have multiple degrees, okay? Tons of certificates from California, the state, county, tons of businesses, and you're making it confusing for me. How does one teach this to a child and expect a child to grasp this and then explain that it's not grooming? Because this sounds so confusing that, to me, it doesn't make sense why you would want to teach that to a child. So we're going to go over the last clip here, and then I'll give you my synopsis of this entire thing. So we went ahead and pulled up this clip here, and when you talk about sex ed in schools, I want you to pay attention that he's really talking, drag queens, it's everyone in the gay. So let me just explain this. When it comes to pronouns in the LGBT community, up until this whole transgenderism, in the LGBT community, everything and everyone was a she. We referred to everyone as she, no matter your pronouns. It wasn't offensive. It was actually just a gay culture type of thing that we referred to everyone as she. And so it's not me affirming that this is a woman. It's me just, still having my culture within me of us calling everything she. So when you talk about, what is happening with sex ed in our curriculum, it's really concerning because you're not offering a justification of why sexual orientation needs to be in there, because you're bringing up the things that we're already doing as a culture. So I want to play that for you guys.
I do think that sex education should be taught to children, and it needs to be inclusive of LGBTQIA people, because I received sex education when I was in middle school, high school, but it actually didn't really include anything about the kind of person that I am and my sort of...
What kind of sex ed did you receive?
So basically, learning about safe sex, learning about safe sex, learning about the risks involved in it. And one of the big reasons that sex education is so important is to empower children to know what is right and wrong for themselves, and to know, and when I say that, what I mean is recognizing when you actually see abuse.
So when you want to talk about this, we're already doing this, in the curriculum. Children already learn about reproduction, STDs and STIs, and safe sex protection. What you're wanting to do is you're wanting to instill into the curriculum an agenda of sexual orientation that has not existed yet. You want to put in heterosexual, homosexual, and all of these other different facets that are quite dangerous to children. And I think, this is where you're starting to get the inherent problems of this, because what you're saying is good in thought. We want to teach children these things, which we are. But then on the same token, you want to instill things and put it in that we're not doing under the guise of, protection and, those types of things. But there's not really anything that is exclusive to the LGBT community that would not also be relevant in the heterosexual community, whether it be protection, STDs, STIs. There's nothing that is strictly one or the other, unless you're saying STIs are binary to orientation, but you're not. I'm just assuming that you just don't know what you're talking about, and it's really sad because you are on a platform with hundreds of thousands of people that could see, and we're bringing up arguments that make no logical sense. So let's bring this to, a hone in here. As a gay man, I'm really opening my eyes to my community and seeing where it is that we're at fault. And if we're going to go ahead and, offer arguments as to why these things need to be offered to children, you want to make sure that the argument is logically sound and making sure that it actually has a backing, not only with the data, but the need, and also that it matches all of the relevant things that it's going to affect, such as when you instill sexual orientation into a curriculum, you're going to have higher kids that are identifying as transgender, which will then in turn lead to a higher percentage of children seeking out some sort of medical intervention. I talk about this in other episodes where they're going to go for medical, mental, or physical intervention. And so for my community, I would really love to see people bring logically sound arguments, or at least be willing. Your entire demeanor towards Kitty Demure in this moment was very accusatory, attacking, and nor did you even offer an open ear to her to be able to understand, her perspective. And so it really sucks, because I think in this moment you could have learned a lot and maybe even taught a lot if you weren't so defensive in this. You were so focused about that, this is one instance here, this is one instance here, but we govern in a way to be able to ensure that these one instance don't continue to grow and become a trend and become the cultural norm. So for me, I think you really failed here in your opportunity. You think I'm going to take a guess here. Your entire crew, your entire fan base is probably looking at this as a huge win. But if people were to just deep dive a little bit further into your argument, instead of just face value, I think we would find the inconsistencies and the holes in your logic. And that's really what I think you're missing and kind of the purpose here. So thank you, Kitty Demure, for your awesomeness on this show. And I'm really excited to announce some teasers or some ideas that we have coming. But you guys, I will continue producing content like this. You guys like the last one I did with the other two gay guys that I canceled, which I'll put a marker up here, I think, or at least will appear in the comments or down below. So much love to you guys. I'm going to head out of here. It's really late and I need to get to bed. So much love, and I'll see you on the next episode.